Hey guys, tonight we're going to take a little trip back in time. Not to a cozy inn or a bustling marketplace, but somewhere far less inviting. Imagine, if you will, the clammy grip of cold steel on your wrists, the rough shove from a cloaked figure, and the sudden, disorienting sensation of being dragged through cobbled streets, your world tilting violently sideways. The air around you, usually filled with the mundane sounds of your own modern life, is now thick with the scent of damp earth, unwashed bodies, and something acrid, metallic, like fear. You stumble, your heart a frantic drum against your ribs, as strange faces, shadowed by hoods and grimy from soot, stare with an unnerving mix of curiosity and detached indifference. This isn't a dream, friend. This is your new, terrifying reality. You've just been arrested in medieval Europe, and let me tell you, you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, if you're listening in, drop a comment below and let me know where you are and what time it is for you right now. I always love to see how far these stories travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. One moment you were minding your own business, perhaps haggling over the price of a chicken at the market, or maybe you simply looked at the wrong person the wrong way. In the medieval world, justice was a swift, often brutal, and deeply personal affair, not the bureaucratic labyrinth we know today. There were no Miranda rights, no lawyers rushing in with subpoenas, no pleas for habeas corpus. Your fate was often sealed the moment a lord's guard, a local sheriff, or even a bishop's personal retinue decided you were a problem. You might have been accused of petty theft, a loaf of bread, a stray chicken, anything that caught a hungry eye. Or perhaps it was something far more serious, like heresy, a crime against the church, which was, in many ways, an even greater power than any king. Imagine being hauled away for speaking ill of the local priest, or for possessing a book deemed heretical, something as simple as a translated Bible in the vernacular. Historians still argue whether the common peasant truly understood the complex theological nuances that often led to such accusations, or if it was simply a tool of control. The suddenness of it all is what truly shocks you. There's no warning, no chance to explain yourself, no time to gather your thoughts or say goodbye to anyone. One moment, life is predictable, hard perhaps, but predictable. The next, you're a pawn in a game you don't understand, surrounded by men whose faces are grim and unyielding. Their armor, even if it's just padded leather and a simple iron helm, seems impossibly heavy and menacing. The clanking of their weapons as they move, the low growl of their commands, it all contributes to a suffocating sense of terror. You try to speak, to protest your innocence, but the words catch in your throat. A rough hand claps over your mouth, silencing you. This isn't a place for reasoned debate. It's a place for silent obedience. You're bound, probably with thick rope that chafes against your wrists, and pushed forward, herded like livestock. The stares from the few onlookers you pass are a mix of fear and morbid fascination. No one dares to intervene, for fear of drawing the same grim attention to themselves. It's a chilling realization. You are utterly alone, utterly powerless. This isn't just about losing your freedom. It's about losing your identity, your voice, your very humanity, swallowed by the faceless machinery of medieval justice. A peculiar detail. During this period, even the concept of innocent until proven guilty was a relatively foreign notion, especially for the lower classes. Often, the accusation itself carried the weight of conviction. It was your job to prove your innocence, usually through ordeal or confession, rather than the accusers to prove your guilt. Quite the uphill battle, wouldn't you say? The journey itself is an ordeal, a testament to the sheer inefficiency and discomfort of medieval travel. You're not riding in a comfortable carriage, certainly not with air conditioning or smooth suspension. No, you're most likely trudging on foot, perhaps tied to a horse's tail like a particularly unlucky dog, or crammed unceremoniously into the back of a creaking wooden cart. Every bump in the rutted, muddy tracks sends a jolt of pain through your already aching body. The sun, when it's out, beats down relentlessly, drying your throat and stinging your eyes. When it rains, which it inevitably does, you're drenched to the bone, the cold seeping into your very marrow, making your teeth chatter uncontrollably. You try to focus on anything but the misery, perhaps the distant chirping of birds or the rustle of leaves in a passing forest. But even these small natural comforts are tainted by your predicament. The guards, impervious to your suffering, bark orders and occasionally give you a sharp prod with a spear butt or a gloved fist if you falter. They're professional in their grim duty, hardened by a life that respects strength and punishes weakness. You catch glimpses of the passing countryside, thatched roof villages, fields of ripening grain, the occasional stone church steeple peeking through the trees. It's a world that feels both familiar and utterly alien, a beautiful landscape you're experiencing from the very bottom of its social order. You crave water, your tongue feeling like sandpaper in your mouth. Food is a distant memory, replaced by the gnawing emptiness in your stomach. They might toss you a piece of stale bread or a hunk of hard cheese, more out of necessity to keep you moving than any genuine concern for your well-being. This rudimentary fare often tastes like dust and desperation. One mainstream historical fact to consider here is that roads in the medieval period, especially outside of major trade routes, were often poorly maintained, if at all. They were largely repurposed Roman roads, or simply tracks worn by centuries of foot traffic and carts. This made long-distance travel incredibly arduous and slow, susceptible to weather, brigands, and general disrepair. A journey that might take you an hour by car today could easily consume days, even weeks, in the 14th century, leaving you utterly exhausted before you even reached your destination. Think of it like a really long, really uncomfortable hike, but with the added bonus of knowing you're heading straight into a bad time. You might even find yourself wishing for a bit of quicksand just to end the misery. Just kidding, mostly. A quirky tidbit. Some medieval travel guides actually existed, offering advice on inns and routes, though they were primarily for pilgrims and merchants, not for prisoners on their way to the oubliette. Imagine checking into a medieval Yelp, only to find the prisoner transport category remarkably sparse on reviews. And those reviews would probably just say, 0 stars, would not recommend the accommodations. As the days blur into an endless cycle of pain and exhaustion, you begin to lose track of time. Is it dawn or dusk? You can barely tell. Your muscles ache with a deep, pervasive soreness, and every step is a monumental effort. The cold nights offer little reprieve, as you huddle for warmth against the rough, unsympathetic ground. Sleep, when it comes, is fitful and shallow, plagued by nightmares of your impending doom. You dream of soft beds and hot meals, only to wake to the harsh reality of your situation. The smell of your own fear and grime a constant companion. This prolonged exposure to the elements and the lack of proper sustenance quickly begins to take its toll. Your immune system, used to modern comforts and pharmaceuticals, would be utterly unprepared for the onslaught of medieval microbes. Even a common cold could become a life-threatening illness. You might start to feel the first telltale signs of dysentery, a common affliction due to contaminated water, which would only exacerbate your dehydration and weakness. Historians still argue whether the overall health of the general population in the early medieval period was better or worse than later periods, given changes in diet and population density, but for a prisoner, the outlook was uniformly grim regardless of the century. You are, quite literally, a fish out of water, floundering in an environment designed to break you. Finally, After what feels like an eternity of bone-jarring travel and gnawing anxiety, the grim silhouette appears on the horizon. Not a welcoming sight, but a monument to power and intimidation. The castle. Its walls, impossibly thick and scarred by centuries of weather and minor skirmishes, rise like an extension of the very earth, dark and foreboding. The sheer scale of it is humbling, an architectural behemoth designed specifically to make you feel small, insignificant, and utterly trapped. As you approach, the details become clearer. The narrow, slit-like windows, more like watchful eyes than sources of light, designed for archers to rain death upon attackers. The formidable battlements, jagged teeth against the sky, seem to mock any thought of escape. You realize with a sinking feeling that this isn't just a building, it's a statement about who holds the power and how little of it you possess. The air itself seems to grow colder as you draw nearer, heavy with the scent of damp stone, burning wood, and something indefinable, the smell of centuries of human habitation, fear, and perhaps despair. The sheer mass of the stone blocks, each one painstakingly cut and hoisted into place by untold labor, speaks volumes about the resources and authority required to construct such a fortress. You might crane your neck, trying to see the top of the highest tower, but it seems to disappear into the low-hanging clouds, a cruel reminder of how far you are from any semblance of freedom. This isn't your cozy, modern home with central heating and soft lighting. This is a fortress built for war, for defense, and for holding people like you. One mainstream historical fact about medieval castles is their primary function evolved over time. While early castles were often simple motte and bailey structures, basically a mound of earth with a wooden tower and a fenced enclosure, by the High Middle Ages, they became sophisticated stone fortresses, serving not only as defensive strongholds but also as administrative centers, symbols of lordly power, and indeed as prisons. Their design was meticulously calculated to repel sieges, with concentric rings of walls, murder holes, and strategically placed towers. Imagine a modern military base combined with a government office and a maximum security prison, all rolled into one imposing stone package. A quirky tidbit: some castles had postern gates, small, secret exits often used for sneaking out messengers, or for a quick escape during a siege. Of course, you, as a prisoner, won't be given the guided tour of these handy exits. You're more likely to see the main gate, which is anything but secret, designed to impress and intimidate, even with its massive wooden doors probably reinforced with iron. It's like arriving at a theme park, but instead of roller coasters, they have, well, let's just say less fun rides. You might even catch a glimpse of the portcullis, a heavy, iron-spiked gate that would thunder down with an unnerving clang, sealing off any hope of entry or exit. As you are finally led through the outer defenses, perhaps past a dry ditch or across a rickety drawbridge, the sounds of the castle begin to envelop you. The distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer, the whinny of a horse, the muffled shouts of guards, and the ever-present caw of ravens perched on the battlements. These are the grim symphonic elements of your new reality. The sheer size of the castle yard, if you're even allowed to see it, would be overwhelming, a bustling microcosm of medieval life, yet one you are now utterly excluded from. You are merely cargo, an inconvenience to be processed. Historians still argue whether the psychological impact of castle architecture was as important as its physical defenses in deterring invaders or controlling a population. But for you, standing there, gazing up at those immense, cold stones, there's no debate. The message is clear, etched into every rough-hewn block. Resistance is futile. Your spirit, already battered by the journey, feels a fresh wave of despair wash over it. The castle isn't just a prison. It's a living, breathing entity that seems to devour hope. You're not led directly to a dark, damp cell, not yet. First, you must pass through the gatehouse, a bottleneck designed to control entry and funnel all newcomers into a specific controlled space. This is where the initial interrogation begins, a chilling formality that sets the tone for your imprisonment. As you are roughly pushed through the massive, echoing archway, the portcullis groans shut behind you with a sound like a giant sigh, severing your last tenuous link to the outside world. The gatehouse, often a fortified structure within the main gate, is a choke point, a place of heightened tension and scrutiny. The air here is colder, the light dimmer, filtering through narrow arrow slits rather than open windows. The heavy timber beams above seem to press down on you, and the scent of cold stone and unwashed guards is thick in the air. You're brought before someone in authority, likely the castle's constable or a senior guard, perhaps even the Lord's Reeve if he fancies himself a man of justice. This isn't a courtroom drama. It's a cold, swift assessment. He sits, perhaps at a rough-hewn table, surrounded by stern-faced guards, their weapons at the ready. There's no welcome, no pleasantries. His gaze is piercing, designed to intimidate, to strip away any pretense of defiance you might still harbor. You feel his eyes dissecting you, weighing your worth, or rather, your worthlessness. He might not even speak directly to you, instead addressing one of his underlings, discussing your case as if you weren't even present, a piece of troublesome cargo to be categorized. One mainstream historical fact is that castle gatehouses were incredibly complex defensive structures, often incorporating multiple layers of protection. Portcullises, heavy doors, murder holes, openings in the ceiling through which defenders could drop stones, boiling water, or arrows onto attackers, and guardrooms. This made them ideal for initial processing and interrogation, a secure space where a new prisoner could be thoroughly searched and questioned without the risk of escape. It was the medieval equivalent of a high-security intake facility, but with significantly less paperwork and considerably more immediate peril. A quirky tidbit: some gatehouses had specially designed doglegs or turns within their passages, forcing attackers to expose their unshielded right sides to defenders. For you, it just means more turns in the gloomy passages, disorienting you further before you even get to the main event. You might even notice a faint, metallic tang in the air, a whisper of past struggles, or, more likely, simply the pervasive dampness reacting with iron. Perhaps a subtle whiff of unwashed dog, too, if the guards keep hounds in the gatehouse for security. You could say it's a rough welcome. The interrogation itself is less about seeking truth and more about establishing dominance. You'll be asked basic questions: your name, where you come from, what you were doing. But the questions aren't truly designed to elicit information, not in the way a modern detective might. They're designed to test your mettle, to see if you crack under pressure, to assess how much resistance you might put up. Your answers are less important than your demeanor. Any sign of insolence, any wavering, any hint of defiance, and you'll likely face immediate, painful consequences. They might slap you, perhaps kick your shins, just to remind you of your place. It's a stark lesson in medieval power dynamics. Might makes right, and you, friend, have no might here. Historians still argue whether the primary purpose of medieval interrogations was genuinely to uncover facts or to extract confessions, often under duress, to justify existing assumptions of guilt. But from your perspective, facing these grim-faced men, the intent feels disturbingly clear. They want submission, and they want it now. The chill in the gatehouse isn't just from the stone. It's the cold dread that sinks into your bones as you realize the full, terrifying extent of your vulnerability. Your words, if you even dare to utter them, feel small and inconsequential in this oppressive space. Having endured the gatehouse's chilling reception, you're now pushed deeper into the castle's labyrinthine interior. This isn't a grand tour. It's a descent, both literally and figuratively, into the heart of your confinement. You're led through shadowed passages, past heavy, studded wooden doors that creak ominously on their hinges, and down spiraling stone staircases that seem to unwind endlessly into the earth. The air grows steadily colder and damper with each step, carrying the faint, unsettling scent of stagnant water, mildew, and something else. A stale, earthy odor that hints at long-held secrets and countless lives lived and lost within these walls. The sounds of the castle, once distant and muffled, now echo eerily around you. The drip, drip, drip of water somewhere in the darkness, the scuttling of unseen creatures in the walls, and the distant, metallic clank that sends shivers down your spine. This part of the journey is designed to disorient you, to make you lose all sense of direction and time. The passageways twist and turn, often leading to dead ends or into dark, empty rooms before resuming their downward trajectory. The guards, their faces impassive masks, offer no explanations, simply nudging you forward with their spears. Your eyes, accustomed to the dim light filtering from above, struggle to adjust to the deepening gloom. You stumble occasionally, your legs weak from the journey and the creeping dread, but there's no sympathy, only a rough hand pushing you back into motion. You begin to feel the claustrophobia setting in, the immense weight of the stone above and around you pressing down, threatening to crush you. It's a truly down-to-earth experience, only without the earth being particularly comforting. One mainstream historical fact is that many medieval keeps, the central, strongest tower of a castle, often had their prisons or dungeons located in their lower levels, sometimes even below ground. This design served multiple purposes. It made escape incredibly difficult, provided natural insulation against temperature extremes, though insulation, in this context, meant cold and damp, and placed prisoners far from the daily life of the castle, making their suffering less visible and easier to ignore. These were not luxury accommodations, unless your idea of luxury is a permanent chill and excellent acoustics for weeping. A quirky tidbit: some castles featured an oubliette, a French word meaning forgotten place, which was a deep, bottle-shaped dungeon accessed only by a hole in the ceiling. Prisoners were simply dropped in and, as the name suggests, often forgotten. While the existence of true oubliettes is debated by some historians as being more of a later romanticized notion, the concept of being dropped into an inescapable hole certainly existed, and the fear of it was very real. You might find yourself peering nervously at the ceiling as you pass under any low arches, just in case. Is that a hole? No, just a particularly large spider. Phew! Wait, spider? Ugh! As you descend, the air becomes heavier, thick with the smell of earth and a pervasive dampness that clings to your clothes and chills you to the bone. You can feel the moisture seeping into your boots, making your feet even colder. The sound of your own ragged breathing seems unnaturally loud in the oppressive silence, punctuated only by the scuttling sounds that suggest you are not alone in these subterranean passages. You begin to imagine the things that thrive in such darkness. Rats, insects, perhaps even things far more unsettling. The psychological toll of this descent is immense. Every turn, every step down, solidifies the reality of your situation. You are being taken somewhere from which escape seems impossible, a place designed for suffering. Historians still argue whether the primary deterrent of medieval dungeons was physical punishment or the immense psychological torment of isolation and sensory deprivation. But for you, as you feel the last vestiges of daylight fade, leaving you in near total darkness, the answer is irrelevant. The darkness itself is a form of torture, stripping away your vision, heightening every other sense to an unbearable degree. You feel the rough, uneven stone walls with your outstretched hands, finding them slimy with condensation. This is not merely a prison. It is a tomb in waiting, a place where time and hope go to die. The journey into the castle's depths culminates in the reveal of your new home, the cell. It's not a room, not by any modern definition, but a cold, damp, confined space that instantly assaults your senses. The air is thick and stale, heavy with the stench of human waste, unwashed bodies, and the cloying sweetness of decay. It's a smell that will soon become as familiar to you as your own breath. The light, if you can even call it that, is almost non-existent. Perhaps a tiny, high-set slit in the wall, too narrow to see anything but a sliver of distant sky, allows a faint, milky gray to penetrate the perpetual gloom. Or perhaps, and this is more likely, there is no natural light at all, only the oppressive, inky blackness that presses in on you from all sides. The floor is likely bare earth, compacted by centuries of use, or perhaps rough-hewn stone, always cold and perpetually damp. Water often seeps through the porous walls, creating a constant clamminess that chills you to the bone and promotes a thriving ecosystem of mold and mildew. There's no bed, no straw, no comfort whatsoever. You'll sit or lie directly on the cold, hard ground, the unforgiving surface quickly making your muscles ache and your joints protest. Your modern body, accustomed to mattresses and climate control, screams in protest almost immediately. You realize, with a profound sense of despair, that every muscle, every bone, every nerve ending is now exquisitely aware of its own discomfort. It's like sleeping on a particularly enthusiastic pile of bricks, but with bonus mildew. One mainstream historical fact about medieval dungeons is that they were rarely purpose-built as elaborate torture chambers, as depicted in later romantic fiction. More often, they were simply storerooms, cellars, or unused ground floor or basement rooms in keeps and towers, repurposed for holding prisoners. Their grimness arose from their inherent design flaws for human habitation: lack of light, ventilation, sanitation, and heating. The idea of intricate, purpose-built torture dungeons is largely a product of Gothic literature from the 18th and 19th centuries, though crude torture certainly occurred. A quirky tidbit: sometimes, if you were a particularly important prisoner, you might even have a latrine hole in your cell, a simple shaft leading down to a cesspit or even directly into the moat. While this sounds convenient compared to a bucket, it would have contributed significantly to the putrid stench within the cell, making your living conditions even more unbearable. Ah, the sweet smell of progress. You might sarcastically whisper to yourself. The silence is broken only by the occasional scuttling of unseen creatures, rats, mice, perhaps even larger vermin that have made this grim place their home. You hear the drip, drip, drip of water, a maddeningly monotonous rhythm that underscores the relentless passage of time. Your ears strain, trying to pick up any sound from the world outside your small prison. But mostly there is nothing, just the vast, echoing silence of the castle's interior, punctuated by your own ragged breathing and the frantic pounding of your heart. The isolation is profound, a heavy blanket of loneliness that threatens to suffocate you. You might try to find a comfortable position, huddle against a wall for some imagined warmth, but there is none. The cold is pervasive, seeping into your very bones. You wrap your arms around yourself, trying to generate some body heat, but it's a futile effort. The dampness ensures that nothing ever truly dries, and the chill penetrates through your clothing. Every breath you take feels heavy, the air thick with invisible spores and dust. Your skin begins to feel clammy, perpetually unclean, and a deep, itching sensation might begin to develop from the pervasive filth. Historians still argue whether the psychological impact of prolonged sensory deprivation and isolation was a more effective form of punishment than physical torment in medieval prisons. But for you, trapped in this cold, damp, lightless box, the distinction feels moot. Your mind begins to play tricks on you in the overwhelming darkness. Shapes seem to flicker in your peripheral vision, and distant sounds morph into distorted echoes. The walls feel like they're closing in, and the concept of outside begins to feel like a fading memory, a cruel joke. This isn't just a cell. It's a sensory deprivation chamber designed for maximum discomfort and psychological erosion. Now that you're settled, or rather unsettled, in your new accommodation, your most immediate and pressing concerns will quickly shift to the primal. Forget the existential dread for a moment. Your body, an astonishingly complex biological machine, is now screaming for the most basic necessities: food and water. And let me tell you, the medieval dungeon's room service leaves a lot to be desired. The pangs of hunger quickly evolve from a mild annoyance to a relentless, gnawing emptiness in your stomach, a sensation so profound it becomes a constant, irritating presence, a drumming beat accompanying your every thought. Your stomach acids churn, protesting the absence of sustenance, and you can almost feel your body beginning to consume its own reserves. Thirst, however, is often the more urgent and agonizing torment. You remember that parched feeling from your journey, but now, without any hope of immediate relief, it intensifies. Your mouth feels like sandpaper, your tongue swells, and your throat is a desert. You might find yourself salivating merely at the thought of a cool, clear sip of water, a memory that feels incredibly distant and luxurious. Dehydration sets in quickly, bringing with it headaches, dizziness, and a profound weakness that saps your will to move, to even think clearly. Every hour without water feels like an eternity, each breath a struggle in the dry, stale air of your cell. It's like trying to run a marathon on a particularly hot day, but without the finish line or the sports drink. One mainstream historical fact is that rations for prisoners, especially those not of high noble birth, were minimal, often just enough to prevent immediate death, but certainly not to sustain health. A typical daily ration might consist of a small portion of stale, hard bread, often made from coarser grains like barley or rye, not the fine wheat flour you're used to, and perhaps a thin, watery gruel or a bowl of meager pottage, usually little more than boiled vegetables if you were lucky. Meat was an absolute rarity. Water, if provided, would be unpurified well water or river water, often teeming with bacteria that your modern immune system would be completely unequipped to handle. A quirky tidbit: some medieval records occasionally mention specific food items being sent to high-status prisoners, sometimes even wine or finer meats, indicating that their imprisonment, while still severe, was sometimes more about political leverage than simple punishment. For you, however, the most exotic thing you'll probably see is a particularly large and well-fed rat eyeing your crumb. You might even find yourself staring longingly at said rat, wondering if it, too, is feeling peckish. A bit like a particularly grim version of a reality cooking show, where the main ingredient is despair. The relentless torment of hunger and thirst quickly dominates your existence. Your thoughts become singularly focused on the next meager delivery, if one even comes. You find yourself obsessively counting the hours, the minutes, straining your ears for any sound that might indicate the approach of a guard with your pitiful meal. When it does arrive, often unceremoniously shoved through a small opening in the cell door, it's not a moment of joy, but one of desperate, rapid consumption. You devour it, not savoring, but simply trying to quell the burning emptiness. The scarcity makes every morsel precious, every drop of water a blessing, even if it tastes suspiciously earthy. Your body begins to adjust in a grim sort of way to this deprivation. Your metabolism slows, and you feel constantly cold, your body struggling to maintain its core temperature without adequate fuel. Your vision might begin to blur, and your movements become sluggish. The mental fog that accompanies severe hunger and dehydration makes clear thought an arduous task. You might even experience hallucinations, brief flickers of food or drink that mock your suffering. Historians still argue whether medieval prisoners, particularly those held for long periods, deliberately starved themselves as a form of protest, or if the meager rations were simply insufficient to sustain life, leading to a slow, agonizing decline. But for you, there's no choice in the matter. You are simply existing on the edge of survival, day by grueling day. Beyond the gnawing pains of hunger and thirst, your medieval dungeon experience comes with an additional, deeply unpleasant layer: the horrifying reality of medieval hygiene, or rather, the complete and utter lack thereof. This isn't just about feeling a bit grubby. It's a pervasive assault on your senses and a constant threat to your health. The air in your cell is a thick, palpable stew of odors. The sharp tang of stale urine from the bucket in the corner, if you even have a bucket. The heavy, sweet and sour smell of unwashed bodies, your own included, and the sickening scent of feces. Every breath you take is a reminder of the filth that surrounds you, and that you are slowly, inevitably, becoming a part of. It's like living in a portable toilet that's seen better centuries. There's no running water, of course, no soap, no way to wash your hands or face, let alone your body. Your clothes, already grimy from your journey, quickly become stiff with accumulated dirt, sweat, and whatever else comes into contact with them. Your hair will become matted and greasy, a perfect breeding ground for lice and fleas. You'll find yourself constantly itching, a maddening sensation that offers no relief. The thought of what is crawling on you, and in your clothes, is almost as disturbing as the feeling itself. Just trying to maintain a semblance of cleanliness becomes an impossible, frustrating battle against overwhelming odds. One mainstream historical fact is that personal hygiene standards in the medieval period were vastly different from modern ones, even for the wealthy. Regular, full-body bathing was not common, and many people simply dry-cleaned themselves by brushing off dirt. For prisoners, even these rudimentary practices were impossible. The sheer lack of sanitation led to widespread disease, with close quarters and contaminated environments serving as perfect incubators for everything from dysentery to typhus. The concept of germ theory wouldn't exist for centuries, so the connection between filth and illness was not understood. A quirky tidbit: while common folk rarely bathed, medieval doctors sometimes prescribed elaborate bathing rituals for medicinal purposes, using herbs and oils. Clearly, these prescriptions did not extend to your current living arrangements. You might dream of a lavender-scented bath, only to wake up to the distinct aroma of rat droppings and desperation. Perhaps you'll invent a new scent, eau de dungeon chic. The lack of sanitation isn't just an inconvenience. It's a death sentence waiting to happen. Open sores, cuts, or even simple insect bites can quickly become infected without proper cleaning, festering into painful, potentially lethal wounds. The constant presence of human waste attracts flies, which then spread bacteria to any meager food you might receive. You might find yourself developing skin rashes, boils, or fungal infections in the damp, unventilated environment. Your eyes might become irritated and itchy from the pervasive dust and pollutants in the air. Every cough you hear from a neighboring cell, or even your own, sends a jolt of fear through you, knowing that any illness could quickly escalate without medicine or care. You might try to maintain some dignity, perhaps by carefully folding your one set of clothes at night or by trying to keep your tiny space as tidy as possible. But it's a losing battle. The grime is relentless, creeping into every crevice, settling on every surface. The very air you breathe feels toxic, laden with disease. You will quickly understand why medieval mortality rates were so high, especially in places of confinement. Historians still argue whether the Black Death, which devastated Europe in the 14th century, was truly airborne or primarily spread by fleas on rats. But what is certain is that the unsanitary conditions prevalent in medieval society, particularly in crowded, unventilated spaces like dungeons, provided an ideal breeding ground for any pathogen. For you, this means every itch, every cough, every faint whiff of something putrid brings with it a silent, terrifying question. Is this the beginning of the end? As if the cold, damp, and perpetual stench weren't enough, you quickly discover that your cell is far from uninhabited. You are, in fact, sharing your intimate space with a thriving ecosystem of medieval creepy crawlies. We're talking about vermin everywhere, an unsettling constant in your new, grim reality. The first sign might be the faint scuttling sound in the walls, or the rustle in the corner that makes the hairs on your neck stand up. Then you see them, rats. Not the cute, laboratory kind, but the large, scruffy, fearless kind. Their beady eyes glinting in the gloom, their tails thick and whip-like. They are bold, unafraid, and they see you not as a threat, but as a potential source of crumbs, or perhaps, in your weakened state, something even more substantial. These aren't just a nuisance. They are a constant source of fear and disgust. They might crawl over you while you try to sleep, their tiny claws scratching, their whiskers tickling, sending shivers down your spine. You'll hear them squeaking and fighting in the darkest corners, a constant, unsettling soundtrack to your imprisonment. And while rats are the most obvious, they are by no means the only unwelcome guests. Fleas and lice are a guaranteed accompaniment, turning your skin into a perpetually itchy landscape. You'll find yourself scratching incessantly, leaving angry red welts that can easily become infected in the unsanitary conditions. It's like living in a particularly low-budget horror movie, but you're the star, and there's no director to yell, "Cut!" One mainstream historical fact is that vermin, particularly rats and fleas, were omnipresent in medieval life, even in castles and noble houses, not just dungeons. They lived alongside humans, thriving on waste and poor sanitation. This close proximity was a major factor in the spread of diseases, most notably the bubonic plague, carried by fleas on rats. So, while you're focused on that rat scurrying past your foot, remember that its tiny passengers could be far more dangerous. It's a very intimate kind of horror, isn't it? A quirky tidbit. Some medieval medical texts actually suggested using remedies made from various insects and vermin, like a concoction of dried earthworms for certain ailments, or even spiderwebs for wounds. Clearly, they weren't too squeamish. You, on the other hand, are probably just trying not to gag at the thought of a rat's whiskers brushing your face. You might even start to develop a highly specialized skill, distinguishing between the various scurries. Ah, that's just a mouse. That thump? That's definitely a rat with a particularly large ambition. The psychological toll of living with these creatures is immense. You lose all sense of personal space, all dignity. The constant itching, the fear of bites, the sheer disgust of sharing your tiny world with a multitude of crawling and scuttling things wears you down. You might try to scare them off, to stomp your feet or shout, but they quickly learn that you are a contained, ineffective threat, and their boldness only increases. Your sleep, already fitful, becomes even more disturbed by their nocturnal activities. You learn to sleep with one ear open, forever on guard. Your modern sensibilities are utterly overwhelmed. The idea of waking up to a rat gnawing on your fingers or toes, a grim reality for some historical prisoners, becomes a terrifying possibility. You try to keep your hands tucked in, your body curled tightly, but the cold and your exhaustion often win out, leaving you vulnerable. Historians still argue whether the physical effects of vermin, such as bites and disease transmission, were more psychologically damaging than the constant sense of being observed, encroached upon, and utterly powerless against these small, relentless invaders. But for you, shivering in the damp, dark cell, the difference is academic. You are not just imprisoned by stone walls. You are trapped within a living, breathing ecosystem of filth and fear. The grinding monotony of hunger, thirst, and filth is occasionally, perhaps even mercifully, broken by another kind of ordeal, interrogation. This isn't just a casual chat. It's a focused, Intense session designed to extract information, a confession, or simply to break your spirit. You're pulled from your cell, often without warning, the sudden exposure to even the dim light of a torch jarring your eyes. You're dragged, perhaps, to a smaller, more formal room in the castle, or even to a specific chamber designed for such encounters. The air here might be slightly cleaner than your cell, but it's thick with a different kind of oppressive atmosphere, one of controlled menace and looming psychological pressure. You're brought before the same authority figure you met in the gatehouse, or perhaps someone even more imposing, a castle lord, a sheriff, or even a visiting inquisitor if your alleged crime touches upon heresy. He sits, perhaps at a heavy oak table, with his scribes at the ready, quills scratching softly on parchment. The room might be adorned with tapestries or hunting trophies, grim reminders of the world of power and privilege from which you are now utterly excluded. The guards are closer now, their faces grim, their weapons more prominently displayed. Their presence alone is a form of intimidation, a silent promise of what might happen if you prove uncooperative. It's like a job interview, but instead of getting a salary, you get, well, let's just say a less desirable compensation package. One mainstream historical fact is that medieval interrogations often relied heavily on a combination of psychological pressure and the threat, or actual use, of physical pain to elicit confessions. The legal systems of the time, particularly in continental Europe with the rise of Roman law and later the Inquisition, placed a high value on a confession as the queen of proofs. Without it, proving guilt could be difficult, leading to a strong incentive to extract one, regardless of its veracity. This meant that the goal was often to make you admit to something, anything, to bring the process to a close. A quirky tidbit: some medieval legal practices involved trial by ordeal, where a suspect's guilt or innocence was determined by their ability to survive a dangerous task, like holding a hot iron or being thrown into water. While less common in formal interrogations within castles, the psychological threat of such ordeals might have hung in the air, a terrifying alternative to a confession. You might even find yourself wondering if holding a hot iron would be better than another week in your current cell. Probably not, but desperation makes you consider strange things. The questions come, slow and deliberate, or sometimes in a rapid-fire barrage. They might ask about your accomplices, your intentions, your knowledge of some plot or crime. They're looking for inconsistencies, for signs of weakness, for anything they can exploit. Your answers, no matter how truthful, are often met with skepticism, a dismissive wave of the hand, or a knowing smirk. They might twist your words, present fabricated evidence, or claim that your supposed co-conspirators have already confessed. The aim is to create doubt, to erode your confidence, to make you feel utterly alone and without recourse. The pressure mounts with each passing moment. The silence between questions stretches, filled with the scratching of quills and the heavy breathing of the guards. Your mind, already dulled by hunger and fear, struggles to form coherent thoughts, to remember details, to maintain your composure. You might find yourself contradicting yourself, or offering information you didn't even know you possessed, just to make the relentless questioning stop. Historians still argue whether medieval interrogators genuinely believed the confessions extracted under duress, or if they simply viewed them as a necessary legal formality to secure a conviction. But for you, the terror is palpable. You are trapped in a psychological battle, and your weakened state leaves you vulnerable to their every tactic, pushing you closer and closer to the brink of giving them exactly what they want. The psychological pressure of interrogation, though brutal, is often underscored by an even more terrifying threat: the very real presence of torture chambers. While you may not be immediately subjected to physical torment, the knowledge of its existence, the distant sounds that sometimes filter through the thick stone walls, and the grim reputation of these places are a constant, insidious form of psychological torture in themselves. You might hear muffled screams, barely audible groans, or the chilling clank of metal from somewhere deeper within the castle's bowels. These sounds, whether real or imagined, plant a seed of dread that blossoms into a full-blown terror, making every shadow seem menacing and every silence pregnant with unspoken threats. It's like hearing a particularly bad heavy metal band practicing next door, only instead of a guitar solo, it's someone's genuine agony. The castle guards, in their casual conversations, might drop a cryptic remark about encouraging cooperation or loosening the tongue, their eyes lingering on you for a moment too long. This isn't just idle chatter. It's a deliberate tactic, a way to ensure that the fear of pain keeps you compliant, even when you're not actively being interrogated. You imagine the cold implements, the strained limbs, the agonizing positions. Your mind, already frayed from hunger, thirst, and isolation, conjures up vivid, horrifying scenarios, each worse than the last. The unseen is often far more terrifying than the seen, and in this environment, your imagination becomes your cruelest tormentor. One mainstream historical fact is that while torture was used in medieval Europe, its application varied widely by region, time period, and legal system. It was generally employed to extract confessions or information, particularly in cases where other evidence was lacking, or for crimes like heresy or treason. Instruments often included thumbscrews, racks, strappados, a form of hanging by the wrists, often with weights, and various forms of branding or mutilation. However, torture was often regulated by law or custom, and was not typically used indiscriminately on every prisoner. It wasn't quite the free-for-all that movies sometimes depict, but it was still unimaginably brutal. A quirky tidbit: some medieval torture devices were designed not to kill, but to inflict maximum pain while keeping the victim alive for continued interrogation. The pear of anguish, for example, was a pear-shaped device that could be inserted and expanded, though its widespread use for torture rather than medical purposes is debated by historians. Regardless, the idea of medieval engineers applying their minds to such grim designs is a chilling thought. You might even find yourself wishing for a simple, quick end, rather than the prolonged agony implied by such devices. Just get to the point, please. My dental plan doesn't cover this. The threat of torture looms over every interaction, every silence, every moment of your confinement. It influences how you speak during interrogations, making you weigh every word, every possible implication. It infiltrates your fitful sleep, weaving itself into your nightmares. You might wake in a cold sweat, your heart pounding, convinced that the guards are coming for you. The tension is constant, a tight knot in your stomach that never truly loosens. You try to remember stories you've heard, historical accounts of resilience, but in the dark, cold reality of your cell, such tales feel impossibly distant and unreal. You begin to notice small details, the subtle tremor in a guard's hand, perhaps, or a fleeting, haunted look in their eyes when they mention the inner chambers. These tiny cues only serve to amplify your terror, confirming that the horrors are not just figments of your imagination. Historians still argue whether the widespread belief in highly elaborate and cruel torture devices was more a product of later propaganda and fear-mongering than actual medieval practice, but what is undeniable is the profound psychological impact of the threat of torture on medieval prisoners. For you, shivering in your cell, every creak, every distant clang, every shadow dances with the specter of unimaginable pain, wearing down your resolve bit by agonizing bit. As the days bleed into weeks, and the horrors of your existence become a grim routine, the desperate thought inevitably surfaces. Escape. Your mind, despite its weariness, begins to churn, searching for any weakness, any crack in the impenetrable facade of your prison. You might start meticulously examining your cell. The rough-hewn stones, the tiny, high-set window if you're lucky enough to have one, the sturdy door. You notice every loose pebble, every faint scratch on the wall, hoping it might reveal a hidden passage or a structural flaw. You test the strength of the iron bars, if present, pushing and pulling, bruising your hands against the unyielding metal. The sheer futility of these attempts quickly becomes crushingly apparent. The castle walls are impossibly thick, designed by centuries of military engineering to repel armies, let alone a single weakened prisoner. The ironwork is solid, hammered by skilled smiths who understood the need for strength. The door, if it's not a heavy slab of wood reinforced with iron, is a massive, bolted affair, often secured with multiple locks and a heavy wooden bar on the outside. Even if by some miracle you could breach your cell, you would then face a labyrinth of dark corridors, armed guards, treacherous staircases, and finally, the colossal outer walls and gates, bristling with defenses. It's like trying to break out of Fort Knox using only a spoon and a whispered prayer. One mainstream historical fact is that successful castle escapes were exceedingly rare, particularly for common prisoners. Those who did manage to escape were typically high-status individuals with outside help, or they exploited specific weaknesses during times of siege or internal chaos. For the average person thrown into a dungeon, the odds of a successful escape were virtually nil due to the robust design of medieval fortresses and the constant vigilance of their garrisons. Escape was less a realistic possibility and more a desperate fantasy born of extreme duress. A quirky tidbit: some medieval castles had secret passages or sally ports, designed for defenders to launch surprise attacks or escape during sieges. Of course, these were known only to a trusted few, and certainly not to the likes of you. Imagining yourself discovering one of these, perhaps by tapping on a seemingly solid wall, becomes another futile daydream. You might even concoct elaborate plans in your head, involving distracting guards with a cleverly thrown rat, or fashioning a rope out of discarded crusts of bread. It's a testament to the mind's ability to cling to hope, however outlandish. The inherent risk of any escape attempt is also terrifyingly high. Discovery would mean immediate, brutal punishment, likely escalating the physical torment you've only so far dreaded. Chains might be added, your rations cut further, or you might be moved to an even more desolate and isolated cell. The thought of being caught, of having your last desperate flicker of hope extinguished through pain, is almost as paralyzing as the thought of staying. So, you might spend hours meticulously examining a loose stone, only to give up in despair, the sheer scale of the task overwhelming you. Every creak of the floorboards above, every distant shout, fills you with a momentary surge of adrenaline, a fleeting hope that perhaps an opportunity has presented itself. But it never does. The world outside your cell remains impenetrable, indifferent to your plight. You begin to understand that escape isn't a matter of will or ingenuity, but of impossible circumstance. Historians still argue whether the psychological burden of constantly contemplating and then discarding escape attempts contributed more to the prisoner's breaking point than physical deprivations. But for you, the cycle of hope and crushing despair, repeated over and over, is a torment in itself, chaining your mind even more effectively than any iron manacles. You are truly trapped, not just by stone, but by the overwhelming, unforgiving reality of medieval confinement. In the profound isolation of your cell, the unexpected arrival of fellow prisoners can be a jarring experience. You might hear them before you see them. A cough, a groan, the clanking of chains from a nearby cell, or perhaps even a whispered conversation that seems to drift through the stone. For a moment, a flicker of hope ignites within you. Another human presence, a shared misery, a potential ally. But this hope is quickly tempered by the grim reality of the dungeon. Trust is a luxury you cannot afford, and other prisoners are often unreliable allies, at best, and dangerous threats, at worst. Their appearance might be as shocking as your own reflection in a dirty puddle. Gaunt, hollow-eyed, clad in rags, they are living testaments to the ravages of the dungeon. They might be brought in and out, or simply be a voice from the next cell over, an unseen presence. You try to communicate, perhaps by tapping on the wall, or whispering through a crack, seeking some reassurance, some information. But the responses you get are often guarded, paranoid, or simply the rambling of a broken mind. Everyone here is fighting their own battle for survival, and altruism is a rare commodity when starvation and fear are your constant companions. You might find yourself wanting to share a joke, but the only punchline is usually more misery. One mainstream historical fact is that prisoners were often held in close proximity, sometimes even communally, particularly in larger prison complexes or during times of war when many captives were taken. However, this proximity did not necessarily foster camaraderie. Competition for meager resources, fear of betrayal, especially if one prisoner was an informant for the guards, and the psychological toll of imprisonment often led to distrust, conflict, and even violence among inmates. It wasn't exactly a supportive group therapy session. A quirky tidbit: some medieval prisons, particularly ecclesiastical ones, allowed prisoners a limited degree of social interaction or even communal activities like prayer, though this was usually reserved for higher status individuals or those held for specific religious offenses. For you, it's more likely a case of listening to someone snore through a particularly thin wall, or perhaps hearing them cough up a lung. You might even find yourself silently judging their coughing technique. Amateur, that's not how you clear medieval phlegm. Friend, the other prisoners might be held for a variety of reasons: petty theft, debt, heresy, political opposition, or even just being in the wrong place at the wrong time. This means their interests are rarely aligned with yours. One might be a hardened criminal, capable of anything to improve their lot. Another might be a desperate peasant, willing to betray you for an extra crust of bread. The whispers you exchange are fraught with suspicion. Are they truly trying to help? Or are they fishing for information to pass on to the guards in exchange for a slight reprieve? The paranoia gnaws at you, making you hesitant to reveal anything about yourself or your supposed crime. You might observe them, as best you can in the gloom, trying to gauge their character. Do they seem resigned, defiant, mad? The sight of their suffering only mirrors your own, amplifying the despair. There's no comfort in shared misery when the misery is so profound and potentially infectious, both literally and figuratively. You realize that relying on anyone here is a dangerous gamble, a risk that could easily cost you more than just your remaining sanity. Historians still argue whether the social dynamics within medieval prisons led more often to mutual support or to further exploitation and breakdown of human bonds. But for you, the stark reality is that every potential interaction carries the weight of desperate calculation, making genuine connection almost impossible. You are still profoundly alone, even in the presence of others. Beyond the physical torment and the presence of unreliable fellow prisoners, the dungeon truly begins to work on your mind. This is where the mind games begin, a subtle, insidious form of psychological warfare that strips away your identity and breaks your spirit far more effectively than any physical blow. You are plunged into an environment designed for sensory deprivation and disorientation, a space where time loses all meaning and the boundaries of reality begin to blur. Your mind, starved of external stimuli, turns inward, becoming its own torturer. It's like being trapped in a particularly bad escape room, where the only prize is your slowly disintegrating sanity. The pervasive darkness is a key component. Without natural light cycles, you lose all sense of day and night. Are you awake for hours, days, weeks? You have no clock, no sun to mark the passage of time. Your internal rhythm, so carefully calibrated in your modern life, unravels completely. This constant uncertainty is profoundly unsettling, robbing you of any routine or predictability. You might try to count the days by scratching marks on the wall, but without light, even that becomes a futile exercise. The silence, too, plays its part. The absence of familiar sounds amplifies every tiny noise. The drip of water, the scurrying of rats, the sound of your own breathing. These sounds, once insignificant, become maddeningly loud, echoing in the vast emptiness of your cell, sometimes morphing into imagined whispers or distant cries. One mainstream historical fact is that solitary confinement, even without explicit torture, has a well-documented psychological impact on individuals, leading to anxiety, depression, hallucinations, and a breakdown of cognitive functions. While medieval captors might not have fully understood the neuroscience behind it, they certainly grasped its effectiveness as a means of control and coercion. It was a prison for your mind as much as for your body. A quirky tidbit: some medieval medical theories linked mental illness to imbalances of bodily humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile. Prolonged isolation and the grim conditions of a dungeon would undoubtedly have been seen as highly conducive to an imbalance of black bile, leading to melancholy, or what we might call severe depression. You might even find yourself wishing for a bit of yellow bile, just to perk things up. You'd certainly appreciate a modern psychiatrist, or at least a cheerful medieval jester. The guards contribute to this psychological erosion. They might ignore you for days, then suddenly appear, asking the same questions over and over, as if testing your memory or your resolve. They might offer false hope, hinting at release if you cooperate, only to retract it, crushing your spirits again. They might deliberately mislead you, fabricating news from the outside world, telling you your family has abandoned you or that your cause is lost. You become hypervigilant, analyzing every word, every gesture, searching for hidden meanings, for clues to your fate, only to find nothing but deeper uncertainty. Your thoughts become repetitive, looping endlessly around your predicament, your past, your imagined future. Memories, both good and bad, become distorted, dreamlike. You might begin to hallucinate, seeing shadows move or hearing voices that aren't there. The line between reality and delusion blurs. Your sense of self begins to erode, your identity tied only to your status as a prisoner. Who are you really without your name, your job, your freedom? Historians still argue whether the psychological breakdown experienced by long-term medieval prisoners was a deliberate goal of their captors, or simply an inevitable consequence of the barbaric conditions. But for you, trapped in the ever-darkening echo chamber of your own mind, the effect is undeniable. You are slowly, relentlessly losing yourself, piece by agonizing piece, in the silence and the dark. After enduring the relentless physical and psychological assaults of the medieval dungeon, your existence boils down to one terrifying, overarching question. What is your uncertain fate? There's no predetermined release date, no lawyer working on your appeal, no parole board to review your case. Your future hangs precariously in the balance, subject entirely to the whims of your captors, the political currents of the time, or perhaps even a forgotten order. Every creak of the door, every distant footstep, sends a jolt of adrenaline through you, wondering if this is the moment your destiny will be revealed. Will it be freedom, continued imprisonment, or something far worse? The agonizing weight gnaws at your sanity more fiercely than any previous torment. You replay every interaction, every word exchanged during interrogations, searching for clues, for hints of what they might do with you. You might cling to irrational hopes. Perhaps a rescuer will come, a message will arrive, or your case will simply be forgotten, and you'll eventually be released by accident. But deep down, a colder, more logical part of your mind understands the bleak odds. The The medieval justice system was rarely about mercy, especially for those deemed insignificant. It's like waiting for a particularly slow, unpredictable medieval mail delivery, where the letter might contain a king's pardon or a death warrant. One mainstream historical fact is that the length and outcome of imprisonment in medieval times varied wildly. Common prisoners accused of minor crimes might be released after a period of punitive confinement or after paying a fine. High-profile political prisoners might be held for years, even decades, as leverage, or executed if their political value diminished. Those accused of serious crimes like murder or heresy often faced execution by hanging, burning, or beheading. Your social status, the nature of your alleged crime, and the personal disposition of the Lord holding you all played a significant role in determining your fate. There was no one-size-fits-all sentence. A quirky tidbit: sometimes a prisoner's release might be tied to a ransom, particularly if they were of noble birth or had wealthy family. Imagine hoping your estranged cousin, who owes you a few guilders, suddenly remembers his familial duty and coughs up a fortune. You might even concoct elaborate scenarios of your triumphant return, only to be brought crashing back to the grim reality of your cell, where the only thing due is another day of suffering. You might even start hallucinating about a medieval Uber arriving for your pickup, complete with a tiny, horse-drawn carriage. The possibility of execution looms largest for many, a final, definitive end to the suffering. You might imagine the block, the noose, the pyre, depending on the severity of your supposed crime. The thought, while terrifying, also offers a perverse kind of peace, an end to the uncertainty, an escape from the perpetual torment of the dungeon. But then the fear of death itself floods back, and you are trapped once more in the terrifying limbo between life and oblivion. Every distant clang, every shouted command, could be for you. You might try to mentally prepare yourself to find a sliver of courage in the face of the unknown. You reflect on your life, on the choices that led you here, on the people you left behind. The sense of powerlessness is overwhelming. Your life, once yours to command, is now entirely in the hands of others, people who see you as little more than a burden, a problem to be disposed of. Historians still argue whether medieval prisoners faced their uncertain fates with stoicism, defiance, or utter despair, given the lack of hope for external intervention or due process. But for you, as the days continue to crawl by, the only certainty is the profound uncertainty itself, a haunting specter that never leaves your side. You are adrift in a sea of dread, waiting for the wave that will either carry you to shore or pull you under forever. As the echoes of that grim journey fade, let your mind slowly, gently drift back. The cold stone, the pervasive damp, the gnawing hunger, those unseen scuttling things, let them soften, become mere whispers in the vast expanse of history. The medieval dungeon, a place of profound suffering, is now a distant memory, a story we've shared, a chapter we've explored together. Feel the warmth of your own bed beneath you, the gentle caress of your blanket, the steady, rhythmic hum of your fan, a comforting counterpoint to the forgotten clang of chains. Breathe deeply, slowly. The air around you is clean, safe, filled with the familiar sense of your own home, not the oppressive odors of centuries past. That journey, that confinement, it was a thought experiment, a glimpse into a very different, very harsh reality. You are here now, in your own time, in your own peaceful space. The terror of the unknown, the agony of deprivation, the psychological torment, these are but shadows that recede with each calming breath. Let the stories settle, like dust motes dancing in a fading beam of light, before gently dissipating into the quiet night. Rest now,